Hello, everyone.
Hi.
We are just getting a bit acquainted. And thanks for joining us, first of all. And we will have like 10 minutes to wait for the rest. So, yeah, let's see if people are joining. So, nice to have you, Dipali, Imran, and Kevin tonight.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Such a pleasure to be here and speak with you guys.
Yeah, really happy to be a part of this.
Yeah, super excited.
It's really interesting because we were just talking like before we connected about how we can have these events now on distance. And Dipali is in San Francisco, and Imran is in London, and Kevin is in Amsterdam, like different time zones there. So that's really nice. Have you been doing that lately as well?
Yeah, I actually with Dipali, she was part of my old cohort in my masters, and so I sometimes host these kind of like little talks called hot topics where we kind of discuss things going on in society and whatnot. But the thing is, we're all global individuals, and so the only thing that's tricky is just managing time. But this is just like, it's so fantastic being able to just talk across across time zones is fantastic.
Yeah, I definitely feel like being on the West Coast of the US I'm like at the end of hearing what's happening in the world. So I rely on my friends very often to keep me posted. And I definitely feel like I've been having a lot of these kind of international morning San Francisco chats.
Nice. Yeah, my family is all over, and I work at a travel company with offices in every time zone. So I'm constantly just reading unread messages and Slack and WhatsApp and email. Yeah, I'm kind of loving this because not everyone knows what I go through.
Yeah. Yeah, that's like very interesting. Like, this is something that everybody has in common in the world right now. Like, it's it's interesting. And how's the weather there? Let's be a bit Dutch. How's the weather?
I mean, weather over here it looks really sunny. It's typical London English weather. It's sunny now. It was raining before, and we also had some grey skies. So it's like all seasons in one day, as per usual. So yeah, no surprises for the weather over here.
I know, so typical London. I miss it.
Yeah, I bet you do. Yeah.
Yeah, just kidding. San Francisco is warm all the time. But right now it's actually incredibly warm. I think the East Coast is also feeling like 100 degrees Fahrenheit.
Wow.
30-something degrees Celsius. I haven't gotten around to understanding how to calculate that yet, but it's really hot.
Yeah, here it's kind of like a mini London. Like London's kind of like our raincoat, but the water still kind of gets in.
Yes. Yeah. We take most of the damage, and then at least by the time it gets to you guys, it's still there though.
Yeah. It was beautiful for like the first 2 months of COVID, and then just fall, just like autumn just hit. Like, yeah.
I know.
Absolutely. And you know what? To be honest, I mean that good weather at the beginning of lockdown, especially for us, right around mid-March, was so helpful because it was such a big change, at that time, and having to adjust, life.
Yeah.
And so the weather was like, because it was so lovely, it was such a big help. Such a big help in that kind of transition. And also lucky that I've got a garden, so it was nice to like enjoy time outside at least, in the sun. Then it makes working from home a lot more enjoyable.
Easier transition.
Yeah, but I think in the Netherlands it was like, if it's a good weather, the Dutch people need to go out. They're not gonna stay in. So there was a lot of moral dilemmas going on here during that time.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm sharing my screen. I think you don't see me because we're first having a bit of a chat before we start. So if you're just tuning in, just get comfortable, get a cup of coffee. We have in different tones. So and we'll start in like 5 minutes, 4 minutes maybe.
Cool.
Cool. I'm actually, if it's okay, I'm just going to quickly grab a glass of water and I will be down in like 1 minute.
Same.
Yes. Okay. So it's just you and me.
Just you and me, yeah.
We don't need them.
All good. All good. How many people have we got on the chat so far? I can't see how many attendees have joined.
On YouTube, you mean?
Yes, on YouTube, yeah.
Yeah, good one. Let me check. Not so sure. Because we have this 16 people now. Okay, that's like
Awesome.
50.
Probably some of them are my family because I also invited them. So
yeah, my family as well.
Yeah.
Making them proud.
Yeah.
No, that's good. So interesting. Have you guys actually now talking a bit about the topic? Have you been following interesting talks or books or anything to recommend to some of our to the viewers that are earlier? You can already share.
I mean, for talks wise, actually, I think it's been a really interesting time with universities. Obviously, because people who were studying during this time have not been able to be studying inside, and so I know that from my old institution and Dipali's, the Royal College of Arts, I know that they've had a lot of talks about design and about specific subjects. Women in design, and also about actually their individual kind of preferred subjects. And so I've been watching some of them, which has been good. And I think maybe I can try and share the link with you to share with some of the invitees after, because there've been some really fantastic talks actually, and again, all really relevant to this time and how people and designers specifically have been managing, through continuing their projects, from working from home and limited face-to-face contact. So I've been watching loads of those.
Yeah, totally. I would love if you shared those links with us.
I will. They haven't been very good at displaying all the information for us. So
I know.
After the talks,
Yeah, for sure. I was gonna say another summit. I guess it's a collective. It's called Hue Design Summit. They have amazing panels. They have amazing talks. And they're just kind of made up of a bunch of very interesting, very well experienced and diverse groups of people. And I don't have something that they've done off the top of my head right now, but I definitely stalk them all the time and will share a lot of the links that they've been.
That'd be great. That'd be great. We can share them with our viewers and our members as well. We have a monthly newsletter, and we can also even add it there to the newsletter. So that's really great.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Kevin, which one would you recommend?
There is a new book that just came out from Aaron Walters, the second edition of Designing for Emotion. I think it's a perfect book and really good insights around how people's emotional states changes how design is impactful or effective on them, which is great for this massive global shift in emotion right now. I think we're all feeling as we go through different stages in our own countries and cities.
Yeah. Okay.
Sure.
Thank you for that. And I think we're going to start, right? Why not?
Sounds good.
Yeah, let's start with, because I have a lot of topics to discuss today. I also bombarded you with a lot of my questions. So I think let's start. But before we start, I want to share a bit about who we are, UXify Eindhoven. So we are Berkay, Chiara, Sarah, and Kelly, as you see in the screen. And yeah, we do monthly events for the UX community in Eindhoven, but now we do it for the whole world. So that's great. We are passionate about user experience, and we are normally located in the Eindhoven area. And you can follow us on Facebook, on YouTube, like you're doing right now, or on LinkedIn. Just type in the search UXify Eindhoven. And so it's really great because what we're doing now in this year, we started with a new set of events, and is that every 3 months we discuss one topic and from a design perspective. And the first set was design and education, and we had 3 events on that. But this is the new series, and this is about UX meets diversity. So that's why you guys and girls are also here with us to discuss this topic. And here, as seen on the screen, what I'm going to present you is we have Dipali, Imran, and Kevin. So Dipali, I'm going to start with you. Dipali is an innovation designer based in San Francisco. She currently works on visual design and brand strategy at Everlaw, a cloud-native e-discovery software that democratizes collaboration litigation. Having worked and studied across North America, Asia, and Europe, Dipali thrives on cultural diversity as a catalyst for growth. She has experience in product design, brand identity, and packaging, and holds a master's degrees from Royal College of Art and Imperial College of London. That's interesting. Through design, she hopes to positively impact the lives of marginalized communities and has a strong passion for social equity, technology, and healthcare. Wow, that's a lot. So thank you for being with us. Would you like to add something more to that description? I mean,
I don't know if I can. That was great. Thank you for summing it up so well.
Okay. Well, the topic of today is using our superpowers for fostering inclusion. And my question to you all, so that you can think about it, is if you had one superpower, which one would that be?
That's a great question. I think I would have to say teleportation. I would say almost because of digital innovation, we are able to see and experience things more than we ever could have before, but physical teleportation would be awesome. I think that traveling and seeing the world and being able to engage with other people is important. And I've been really lucky to be able to do that through my resources. If I could do that in a blink of an eye, that would be even better. What about you all?
Okay, thanks for that. Yeah, that sounds like an amazing one to have. But if I read your description, I think you already have it. You're like in so many places already.
Yeah, thanks to British Airways for all the teleportation. And booking.com, Kevin.
Yeah. Now, Imran, he's a designer who cares about people. Curious, empathetic, and adaptable, Imran wants to cultivate human-centered design experiences globally to expand his understanding of culture and behavior to make a social impact. He's excited by the diversity people embody in different social groups and wants to elevate the inner working of the day-to-day human experience to make the world a better place. At the Helen Hamlin Center for Design, Imran is active in the space of age and diversity. He's currently leading a project set out to challenge the lack of community and lack of voice that older people experience in the environment of affordable sheltered housing across the UK. Well, that's also very impressive, I must say.
Thank you.
Will you add anything to that?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, as Kelly mentioned, I'm at the Helen Hamlin Center for Design, and that's a research center, part of the Royal College of Art, where I studied with Dipali. And yeah, working on a human-centered design project, and our project partner is called the Guinness Partnership. They're a kind of big affordable housing and service provider across the UK with a kind of large target audience for older people. And so the brief was really, really open. It was essentially how can we improve the lives of residents in our sheltered housing schemes. And so for me, it was a really exciting time because I could do a few months of like ethnographic research and exploring different residents' lives to fully understand their kind of experience, and really discovered that there was a need to challenge loneliness and this lack of empowerment that older people face living in affordable sheltered housing. So I'm creating a kind of product service for the inbuilt environment that's for residents and led by residents, so they can kind of host their skills and interests within their communities so that they can connect with one another in a way that's safe and comfortable for them. And it's been also designed to give residents a voice so they can kind of clearly communicate through physical posts with their building managers about their needs and ideas for communal spaces in their shared homes. And this is really to kind of elevate that sense of ownership that a lot of people lack, living in sheltered housing. So it's been a really tricky time throughout lockdown, actually, as the situation meant I haven't been able to be physically with people during the development stage of the project. But however, as designers, this was another kind of challenge to overcome. So managed to co-design something remotely and with all the kind of stakeholders. So it's been a great project to be working on.
Yeah, and I think the elderly has been a very affected group by what is happening now. So it's even how is it been like? I can imagine that you took this into account for the service that you're working on.
Yeah, it's really tricky because the way that I've had to communicate with people has been quite fun for me. To kind of co-design with others. I've been like sending letters with print-offs, and then when some of the older residents get it, they've got a number for me to call because they may not be good at downloading PDFs or on Zoom. But it's so trying to imitate that kind of development process and get them as involved as possible, because being physical and not being able to put probes and prototypes out in these places is so, it's impossible, and that's such a big part of the process, as I'll probably get into a bit more later. But it's been a really interesting project to be involved in at this time. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, we'll definitely want to hear more about that. So probably we come back on the questions. And now, last but not least, we have Kevin. Kevin is a Liberian American, co-founder of Wise Assistant and a senior UX designer at Booking.com. Previously, he's been a UX lead for PwC, EY, Capital One, Gap Inc., Chase Bank, and more. Yeah, that sounds already like a lot. Hailing from Washington, D.C., he has also been a speaker and instructor for Growth Tribe, Georgetown University, and others. He's a member of the steering committee of Be Bold, which is Booking's employee resource group for the empowerment and advancement of Black employees and customers. Kevin, would you like to add something to that?
Thank you so much for the broad introduction. I love it. So a lot of the work I focus on at Booking is in the post-book. So after you've actually made a booking, you pay for your reservation, there's so much, right? This is where you're preparing to travel. This is the actual travel experience you have getting to the destination. And so much has changed. Travel is heavily impacted by COVID, and not just the traveler, but also the owners of the hotels and the services and the service providers, the communities that rely on that income, the taxes. And so a lot of the work I do with Be Bold is really talking about how we make the product more inclusive. We help drive dollars to where people are kind of most impacted. And then we really try to balance the playing field. The world will have to come back slowly, and the recovery will be harder for people who are in these marginalized groups. And I think that travel, definitely needs a closer look to be more inclusive and more diverse.
Oh, that's interesting. And actually, I noticed that I forgot to ask Imran, but maybe first I'll ask Kevin. So to round it up, what will be your superpower? What is your superpower? Maybe you already have it.
I'm gonna slightly borrow from Dipali. My superpower is teleportation. I think I've traveled now to 47 out of the 50 U.S. states and 42 countries in the world. I speak 4 languages, and I think this is really useful for my job at Booking, but overall as a UX designer, to try to be the voice of people around the world, especially when my customers, especially for Booking, are everyone. Everyone who deems travel necessary for work or for pleasure, and everything in between.
Great. Now, Imran.
Well, Kevin actually has part of the superpower I would like, which is to be able to kind of speak any language on cue. I think that would be so fantastic. And again, it's really so I can, if you're traveling to different places in the world, that you can kind of connect with communities immediately. There's, even though there are many ways to connect even without language nowadays, I think that would be something I would just love to instantly learn a language.
That's an amazing power. I love that too.
Good one. When you're almost at 4, you know, keep going.
Duolingo.
Yeah, exactly. There are already
Yes.
some apps that can help you with that. I mean, Google Translate goes a long way, but sometimes it can get it very wrong, very awkwardly wrong.
Yeah.
So I get the superpower. Okay, now thank you so much for being here tonight. As I mentioned, we're gonna have a fireside discussion. Fireside chat. I thought that was a very nice name, so I put it. Yeah, I just get a bit warm. It's the middle of the summer, so maybe don't need. But so what we're gonna. These are the topics that I would like to discuss tonight. I hope we can go through them. So the first one will be about identity, diversity, and inclusion in design. Probably all of them can take like days to talk, but let's try to cover them. I would also like to know a bit about your personal experiences, how we are doing right now in terms of diversity and inclusion in design. You already talked about your superpower, like personal superpowers, but I would like to know more about the design superpowers that we can use for making the world more inclusive, and also like to look a bit more into the future. How do we see the future, and what trends do we see when it comes to diversity and inclusion? So I'm going to try to time box that so we can stay in time, but I know, maybe a good conversation. So I hope we don't skip a topic. So let's try to, let's see how far we can get. For the people following the event, just share your questions in the chat below, and then I will ask them to our panel. But we can also, at the end, just have another round of questions, and we can get back to them. So let's start with the first question, because I have some. I'm multitasking here. So these are the 4 topics that I just mentioned. Identity, diversity, and inclusion are very important when designing new products, because they'll help you to know who you are designing for. It's really about people. So if you look at these concepts, how will you define them? What are they? What are they not? And what do you think is the impact of design in them? So who wants to start?
Yeah, Kevin?
Sure. Yeah, I'd like to start. I just recently gave a talk to Booking about how we look at this as a design process. I think diversity is the process of hopefully having an impact of inclusion. I think when people hear about diversity and inclusion, they very much think about these employee resource groups or these quotas or these percentages we're trying to move every year, and they less so think about this as an active effort or a factor of design, the same way you would usability, accessibility. It should be a factor of every single element, every deliverable, every thought, every strategy. And I think that's how you create this bigger change and hopefully result in more and more inclusivity.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think that these are like some of the key kind of design considerations that kind of must be explored with any project of any sort. Like decision making in all 3 of these has to be embedded throughout the whole process, and not be this kind of post realization that we try and solve at the end of a design. And I think that it's really important that designers need to be kind of fully capable to explore through kind of immersion and plunging yourself into the kind of context. Whether it's an environment or a community or an experience. These 3 kind of concepts really require designers to completely experience other people's worlds.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I feel like what Kevin said really struck me, that diversity is the process. I totally empathize with that. And I think we're going to touch on this later, but I also feel like designers have a responsibility to research very heavily before they can make any sort of executions or outcomes. And I think an example of heavy research without diversity you can see in kind of the healthcare industry in some places. There are so many cases, and I mean, I could go on about this, but I'm sure you all can look it up, of course. But, there's cases where people have been not necessarily racially profiled, but people of different ethnicities outside of the Caucasian race have definitely been negatively affected by some of the lack of diversity within that heavy research. And so I think that research is really important, and I think diversity is a really important piece of that research so that you can kind of have that outcome of inclusivity.
Yeah, I was also, when I was preparing the question, I came across this question was, diversity of what? And then I ask you as well, because there was also one thing and quote of the VP of diversity in Facebook, and she said that you can have like all white middle-aged men, able-bodied, and then you can have diversity. Now it's like, maybe not. So I'm asking you, what do you think? How do you think is, if I say diversity of, what would you fill in there?
I was actually recently posed with this question as well. You know, diversity of what, and also how much is enough? And I think when people ask that question, the first thing I consider is, have people thought about how much things change, and have people understood what the context of today is? So everyone who has the ability to, which is many more people than before, travel. And so when you bring other countries, other ethnicities, and other races into your day-to-day, into the things that inspire you and into the things that you profit off of, I think racial diversity is at the forefront of that. Diversity of thought is extremely powerful, and you know, it could be mutually exclusive from racial diversity, but I think today it is really important to discuss that as a pinnacle of what diversity really means, especially for designers and decision makers.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. The diversity of thought, you can get to that in so many different ways, right? I think this quote has gotten kind of famous because of the lens that diversity kind of usually gets brought up in is race. I've had the unfortunate encounter of applying to talk at conferences, and they're like, oh, it's amazing, we really need someone to talk about diversity in design. And I'm like, I actually came to talk about A/B testing. So there's so much more diversity to talk about, like age discrimination and like natural language and things like that. You know, people really just think about what they can see sometimes. And as designers, you know, even we've experienced this where people think design is just the part that you see as well. So it's so much more than the colorism and racism. It's like trying to think about how we factor in as many people as possible so that we have this inclusive process that produces an inclusive outcome. We can't have an exclusive process and then hope that magically at the end we're going to have this rainbow effect.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I mean, it's like, and also, you know, these three concepts, and specifically identity is, you know, it's an concept that's always expanding, you know, and especially in society today. And so these are damn near impossible to explore from your own perspective, you know. And I think that, you know, designing with people rather than for them, and to understand other people's experiences, to fully, you know, explore how people use things because of their different diversity, you know, is so key, and as Kevin said, you know, so key to be part of that process.
Yeah. But now that you mentioned, like, I have an interesting slide here to share, because of what Dipali just mentioned regarding that how racial diversity is at the forefront, pretty much, of diversity. I came across this interesting image of the design census of last year in the United States. So yeah, we're in Europe, but this one is also very telling in the United States. So ethnicity is a very important part of who we are and how we see the world, and that has also to do with identity as well. But if I look at this graph, it seems that is our Caucasian colleagues, white Caucasian colleagues, the one that are leading or that are the majority now in our field. So because personally, it is not very often that I sit together with colleagues of color. I would like to know what it's like for you guys to be a designer of color in your companies, in your industries. according to this graph, it's pretty much likely that you might be the only one in the room. So.
I think it can be maybe a little lonely or feel a bit lonely sometimes. And I think that was first evident for me when starting my design journey properly at university when I was kind of like 19. And that actually seemed to kind of resonate even with my former institution where I did my master's. And I think that it's quite tricky because, especially when you're doing a master's program where it's really a big time to explore, I never really felt that comfortable to explore the subject of being a person of color in design education. And I think that was because a lot of the tutors and people who were guiding me also weren't people of color. So it was difficult for me to even think about or know where to start. So it can feel a bit lonely at times, especially when you want to explore something, but you've got no footing or other people to kind of help you along that journey in your environment.
Yeah. I mean, I Imran and I went to grad school together, so I definitely share some of those experiences. And I think building off of that answer, the biggest takeaway, one of the most positive takeaways from me is that you constantly have an opportunity to help educate other people. But kind of the flip side to that is you have to get really good at convincing people to believe you. You have to get really good at convincing people that what you're saying is actually something that affects populations, even though it's not something that affects the majority of like the 20 people that are usually in that room that aren't also part of that race. And I think it is a great lesson of confidence as designers, to stand up for what you believe in, to really push forward your work, and to learn early on, especially if you experience design in academia, to experience early on that your voice might not be shared with other people, but your power can be if you can overcome kind of the other voices that might be trying to, maybe say, oh, I don't know if that's actually an issue, or I don't really think that's worth focusing on. And, you have to learn to stand up and say, yeah, it is worth focusing on. I know, many people that go through this, I have been through this, and I think it's worth fighting for. So, again, just to kind of round off that answer, I think it is lonely and it can be really difficult early on, but it's a great way, for anyone who's watching, if you are in school and feeling this, take this as an opportunity to teach your peers, and take this as an opportunity to learn from them too. So you're not constantly feeling like it's you against them.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with the you against them thing. I think it's a mindset shift. I think that as someone who was majority a self-taught UX designer, I came kind of as a developer at the beginning, I spent a lot of time doing client-facing work because I was freelancing and then consulting. I think I've only ever had a person of color as my manager once in 10 years.
Wow.
I've been fortunate to report to lots of amazing women. But like as far as other diversity goes, there's never been a huge age difference. There's never been a huge, difference in background in the managers themselves. And so there's not a lot to relate to on a personal level. So it makes it really hard to say, oh, we're not being inclusive in who we have as research participants, or we're not being inclusive of the market we're shipping this product into. We've only interviewed, 10 of the same people. That isn't indicative of the London market or the Hong Kong market. We've kind of cherry-picked people to talk to. This feedback is going to be skewed. Oftentimes people put a lot of pressure on the research and the data being this like holy grail of like perfect representation. But if the research process of recruitment and analysis is skewed and biased, so will the results. So yeah, it feels a bit lonely, but I think those moments, like getting it early into the process, gives you that foundation. And once I have like more, let's say, less biased research, it's a lot easier to say, well, this is what the research says, and therefore push people's minds to be more inclusive later on in the design process.
And what do you mean when you say biased research? In which sense is it biased?
There's a couple of different ways to do this, right? I think oftentimes you hear Silicon Valley just happens to be like a famous example, and I used to live there for 3 years, that like, oh, the US national average is 13 to 14% for this race. So therefore our numbers have to be that. Now, if your numbers are that far below that average, then that's a really good benchmark because it's usually double what the numbers are, unfortunately. In other circumstances, like Europe famously has a hard time getting national or continental data. You're trying to merge data for like 45 countries, different countries have different measurements. Oftentimes you just look at the company data. So if who converts in this country for our user base happens to be 50% Black, how come our participants are not at least half Black? How do you actually match the research to the market segment you're going after?
Yeah, I think just one more point to add to that is that your research process definitely needs to be scalable, because the world changes every day, as each one of us have spoken about. And the research process that I might do today is going to be really different tomorrow. And keeping that in mind when we are thinking about how to be inclusive is really important.
Yeah, we're getting a question, and I would it's a bit in the previous topic, but the whole thing is related tonight, so it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It was about, I think Dipali said something about how much diversity is enough, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the question is, but also who decides when it is or it isn't enough? And how do people come to these decisions at all? They would like to hear that.
It's a great question. So I can give a little bit more insight on my thoughts, and I would really love to hear from the other participants as well on this. I think that any sort of leadership position that people are in, whether you're a parent, whether you're the president, whether you're a teacher, when we think about how much is enough, right, how much diversity is enough, part of leadership is half is representing the population that you are leading, and the other half is guiding them because for some reason you were chosen to be the leader, and you have that guiding power. And I think you can't, so this kind of goes back to what I was saying. You can't ever decide what's enough today is going to be enough tomorrow. That thing has to be changing and evolving. But I really think, like, if your research process is solid, and as Kevin was saying, if you've taken enough things into account and if you've made that a scalable process, that's how I would define enough for now. And that's subject to change. And I think that uncertainty freaks people out because you can't anchor like a specific thought process to that. But I think enough is like enough can be a very organic thing. It doesn't need to be so static.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that also going back to almost reevaluate, if you've created something and you've been, inclusive throughout the whole process, and then you've got this tangible thing or something that you've created, actually, that's not the end of it. As Dipali mentioned, that things are constantly changing and the society that we live in is changing, and these three kind of concepts and areas are always expanding. And so it's kind of like reassessing what you've made a year later, to see how things have changed or how the users have grown or so I think it is that constant thing, which is also uneasy, unnerving rather, to think that, I did everything right in the process and this is the thing. This is, really inclusive. And that may only be inclusive for 1 year, and it's constantly having to evolve and grow your outcome.
Yeah, I agree with both of these. I think I'm somewhere in the middle. I think that oftentimes people look to, if the company has one, a head of diversity, equity, and inclusion or belonging. They look to heads of HR, and these people very much are graded and judged and almost assessed by these numbers that move. My kind of like analytical hat, right, tells me that people oftentimes think about diversity and inclusion as an outcome. And as you said, it's more of a process.
Yeah.
If you measure during the process, you should be able to see historical data. And if for 50 years, your averages have been below average, suddenly reaching average is no longer going to mean that you've hit the plateau. You have a rolling average now that's set for 50 years, you're behind. You kind of need to shoot above and beyond whatever the national percentages for that race or that gender or that age group, because you're making up for all this time where you've been underperforming and underrepresenting this audience.
Yeah, and also, I mean, I'm not in the panel, but I'll just say something. Is that I noticed that it's like, okay, so this is the average, so we need to, it's 13%, as Kevin was mentioning. So we just go for that as a goal. But then you don't really think like, oh, wait a minute, how is it possible that it's only like this tiny group that we are aiming? Maybe we need to look more into what's happening in society. Because I have also those kind of discussions at work that you say like, oh, there are not a lot of people of color in the study, so it's okay. Then we don't have, it's because the pipeline is not there. And you think like, whoa, maybe we should also think about making the pipeline ready for more people as well.
Yeah.
So
sorry, I'll just add one more thing to that.
Yeah.
We came across an experience when I was in school, and one of my colleagues was saying, oh, but my target market is XYZ. So that's why I'm doing it this way. And, this kind of goes back to what I was discussing earlier. Part of what you want to do as a leader and as somebody that holds responsibility is definitely represent your market. But you also need to take that opportunity as a chance to kind of be on the path in the right direction and take that first step, which can be difficult, pragmatically and thinking about business, that can be difficult. But I do think that it's something that should be encouraged more. You can help build out a market that might feel underserved, and your research doesn't show that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have to hop in on that. That's
yeah.
Go ahead.
Like the comment about path and direction is very much kind of a link back to my last point, where I think hitting a bullseye that was drawn 4 years ago does not mean that you're on target. It actually means you're still on target.
Exactly.
The trajectory of an audience or a group is scaling to become from a minority to a majority, as it is mostly in every metropolitan city in the world, but especially some stats have been looming. In the US, it'll be minority white in every major city in the next 18 years. And it already is for Gen Z. If you're only going to be hitting what you should have hit 20 years ago today, you will be very much behind when Gen Z is the majority of the spending capital of the workforce and of the labor force in every country. So if UX is supposed to improve ROI and have $1 become $100, why are you accepting $2 returns? Like, let's go for the end of the day, the trajectory that is going to come inevitably.
Okay, I should go to the next question, but I'm not going. I'm going to first because Dipali was mentioning just now, saying like when you are the only person of color in the room, then you have to do a lot of convincing of people to believe you, and like also take that into account. But sometimes, like, what advice would you give to young designers, especially that are like, you're trying to fit in, finding your way, and now you also have to go around convincing people about believing you.
Yeah.
How would you? Yeah, just from your experience, how did you manage that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Imran said it best, and in the simplest terms, it's lonely. And sometimes when you try to convince other people and it takes a long time, sometimes you get into a situation where you're like, wait, maybe I should even try to convince myself, is this worth going after? Is this worth doing? And it's tough. It can be really, really difficult as a young designer, growing up in a place that wasn't very diverse in terms of race. And I think the best thing about how connected we are today is that you can always find support systems, and you always have the ability to reach out and say, hey, person that's like me, who might not be in my studio at 2 a.m. when we're cramming to finish a project, do you think that this is worth happening? I mean, we at my company, we use a ton of different softwares to A/B test and, to figure out, okay, what about our product is working? What isn't working? What do random people from anywhere have to say about it? And I think access to that is really, really important. So if I had to give like a specific piece of advice to someone, it's that, the position that you're in to even be in a room or at a decision-making table where you are the only one means that sometimes you have to put your game face on, and you have to be tough, and you have to believe in yourself. And I know maybe it sounds cheesy, but that's been, extremely, extremely helpful for me. And, to Imran's point, there were not a lot of people of color or women who were our advisors when we were doing our graduate program. But, I worked on projects that regarded women's health and marginalized populations, and I was floored at how responsive and how positive those people were. And I think part of that was because I didn't approach it timidly, saying, yeah, I don't know, women's health is a little awkward to talk about. I was like, hey, this is a problem. Here's the data, and here's my personal experience. This is all I can give you. Believe me, and persist. So persistence and belief in yourself. Those are the two things that I think you need to get through something like this.
Yeah. And I think actually, it almost builds a resilience for you as a designer, it's the idea that we are, constantly kind of trying to communicate our ideas in the best ways, or communicate our process in the best ways, and having that resilience to say, this is why I'm doing something, and this is why it's meaningful, and there are a big or a large group of people who also feel the same way, and being able to make others realize, if they don't realize, that in itself is an exercise which can be painful, but it really builds your resilience as a designer, and builds your almost like some of your soft skills in a way. So there's always a silver lining in some cases.
Yeah.
No, but I'm gonna go to the next question, because I'm like too excited about the discussion. But I think it's I really enjoy it. So I came across this graph. I'm getting some feedback that I could do better with sharing my the size of the screen. Do you see it? Yeah. No.
Yep.
So I came across this graph that explains it from a more design, like equality and equity from a design perspective. Because normally there is to explain those, it's like the typical with the kids in the fence and with the boxes. But this one I liked it because it was more designing to explain equity and equality. And I really like this quote: equality is giving people equal access, while equity is giving people equal outcomes. What do you think? What do you think is the current state of design when it comes to equality and equity? Are we designing for equity, equality, or exclusion, or an oppression, like completely on the different spectrum? I'd like to get your thoughts on that.
I personally think that we're leaning very much towards designing for equality and giving everyone a kind of level playing field, and that's also why we're designing for exclusion, because we're not able to navigate or maneuver around maybe the same type of platforms, and to kind of bring up an example of like an older generation and things like online banking and services. There are a significant amount of tech for older people that is proven to not be inclusive, and we constantly design for people, without knowing the ins and outs of their daily lives and their struggles and their challenges. But we think that if we make something that's really simple to use and a bunch of people can use it, and everyone's on the same playing field, then it's okay, And so it's really difficult because I'll use my mum as an example, and if she's watching, hi mum. But with online banking, my mum knows how to use online banking, but she always wants me to kind of be there, just to watch over in case she doesn't do anything wrong. And again, it's because of the mindset for a lot of older people of cautiousness and managing finances, And so the thing is, it's really difficult to do, but you have to design something with that safety and security in mind for this group of people. And so the question kind of becomes, for the existence of like online banking or something, instead of thinking like how can we design like a digital platform that makes it easy for us to manage our finances, but we also have to think, how might we design to ensure that older people who may be less tech literate feel safe and secure while managing their finances. And that in itself is a completely different experience, which I don't think that we yet consider, all the time. And so I definitely think that we design for equality and hence exclusion.
I love that example. That was perfect. I happen to come from Capital One and JP Morgan Chase, right? So like I literally had to challenge some of these things. I also think you stumbled upon a good framework that I've been recommending. There's this organization called Project Inkblot, which gives people a framework to kind of learn and internalize how they design for equity versus equality and exclusion. Mm-hmm. I think it's a really great resource because I think people oftentimes don't realize, there's the Simon Sinek story from TEDx around studying from why, but then how often do you go back to your why when you're doing your how might we's or your jobs to be done framework exercises? I think throwing in a how might we for every single design process, which is like, how might we be more inclusive, would completely change the outcomes of every phase of the design. So like when you're diverging, are you including inclusive, diverse ideas? Because if you're not, then you're never going to converge and land on one. If they're never if they're never factored in at all, then you're not actually, building for that. So I'd say most of the design today is heavily exclusionary, And I would say probably half of it is supporting oppression, because we've never really gone back to look at the foundation with this mindset of how might we change at the very beginning, the earliest process. We talk about user experience being end-to-end. So like from the second the user realizes they have the problem, are we talking about all users and all problems?
Yeah.
Yeah, if you start questioning there, I think it changes the entire game.
Yeah, and like this stuff is hard, and in practice it can take a lot of time, but I totally agree with everyone else. I think the current state of design is still in kind of this infant stage of inclusion, which is focused on equality, which is the assumption that everyone is going to benefit from the same support, and that as an institution or an organization or a community or a leader, we're doing good by giving everyone something. However, even if you give somebody one thing and somebody who needs two things, you give them two things, it's still not necessarily tapping into the full spectrum of what equity means. And I've seen, the example that you showed about the bikes is amazing. And I've also seen another one that deals with, people watching a baseball game. And I was trying to explain this to someone where if there's a 6 foot tall person, a 5 foot and a 3 foot person, and the fence in front of them is completely opaque, a lot of people are like, oh, how do we make them taller? How do we make them taller? We need to get 1 box for the 5 foot person, 2 boxes for the 3 foot person. We have to make them taller. And I'm like, why don't you just make the fence clear? Right? Like that. So that to me, I think that to me taps into how accommodating we can be from the systemic barriers that are put into place first. And I think acknowledging what that systemic barrier is going to catalyze how we get to equity. Before we can do anything, if everyone doesn't kind of rally around what that systemic oppression is, it's going to be really difficult to move forward. But I think, as the others have said, we're covering a lot of ground and we're making some progress, but I think aligning on what those problems are and aligning on what those user needs are really important, because sometimes the solution is right under your nose.
Yep. You're on mute.
Typical. So I think that's a nice, we're not familiar with the situation. So now it's a nice bridge to my next question. So I came, and I'm gonna put this one also in full screen. Came through this quote, that design is the intent behind an outcome, and someone extended it to the intent and unintentional impact. So that actually systems produce what they're designed to produce. A lot of times is a lot of, oh no, we didn't mean it. And I'm thinking now about Twitter, for instance, that is like a bullying platform. And they never really thought about that, I guess so, when they were starting. But so now I'm thinking, but I mean, at the end, that's what that design produced. So you should also be accountable for that. And my question for you is, so if inequality can be designed, that means also that it can be redesigned. How do you think we can leverage our design power to redesign that?
I think that personally, one of the kind of main superpowers or powers that we can use to leverage that is the power of collaboration and the power of empathy to understand people's experiences better. And again, like we said, and like I've said a million times over, and making that part of the process, not just for kind of validation ideas, but for actual design development. Like one of the most, for me personally, the most important stages of a project is kind of designing probes and designing prototypes, because you've done this thing with something in mind, and now it's time to test it and see how people use it. And often what you'll find is that having a conversation with someone or talking to them, about, even if they've used something or tested something, words simply aren't enough. You really need to like shadow the way that people use things and follow people around, and think, oh my god, this is how people are using this, or this is how people are using that. And it's really that stage of the project where you can start prototyping and testing things is really the ultimate chance to kind of engage people in something tangible that they may not have otherwise been able to imagine. And so I think that as designers, we can understand the kind of unintentional impacts of we can understand the kind of unintentional impacts that our designs may have early enough to do something about it. But you just need to have people involved in that process throughout the whole way, and I think that's really key, that people need to be, I say people, I mean that the people who we're designing for need to be the co-creators and the co-authors alongside us. We may be the designers, but these are the people who are using it. And so technically they're the designers, just as much as we are. If anything, we're facilitating the design. And so I think that the power of being able to collaborate and empathize with the group of people you're designing for can really, really help realize that early on.
Yeah, I just got a question that I think is really, you kind of just answered it, but just to confirm, would you say that an inclusive process, say co-creation, make an inclusive product or service inclusive? Like make a product service inclusive per se?
Yeah, that's a tricky one. Yes and no, because it depends on how many people you are including, as well. It's really tricky. I mean, an example which I can use is for the project that I'm working on with older people, and I should use older people in inverted commas, because technically the people who are going to be using this thing I'm making are 55 plus. Now 55 isn't old, 65 isn't old.
No.
And so not only is there a spectrum of age and ability, ranging from people who are totally healthy to those who maybe have dementia, there's also a whole nother spectrum of culture, So a lot of these schemes that I'm with the older people I'm working with in London, it's really multicultural, and outside it's not. And so, so I think that it's just like, you really need to specifically focus on those who are on the outskirts as well of your target audience, So trying to be inclusive in that process, but also thinking about people who are extremes as well, and extreme case, users who may be interacting with your product or service or whatever it is.
Nice. I think I was going to add that it's always quite interesting to me, because the process is maybe the last thing people come to. It's very commonly talked about in HR with the pipeline problem. But then we kind of effectively say, well, the pipeline exists, people will enter it or not enter it. As the slide kind of showed earlier, intent is not impact. And if you are trying to design something, you are not given an A for your attempt, you're given an A for the outcome and the success of your actual output. So if the system is supposed to produce equitable applicants, and yet you only ever get like a very, very skewed group of applicants, then you actually have to put more effort towards the group that is not kind of naturally or organically entering the pipeline. So you make partnerships with universities, certain groups, you find allies, you find mentors. I think this applies to each one of us as designers, as far as getting outside resources and help on an ongoing basis, as much as it does for corporations and businesses.
Yeah, and oftentimes I think designers in industry, we inspire people, we build things, products and services that can sometimes be reactionary to, at least in the US, right? Like private institutions versus the government. There's pros and cons to both. But while we inspire people, while we make beautiful experiences, and while we tap into people's emotional psyche, we're not often the people that sit at the desk and sign the law to pass a piece of legislation that's going to effectively change something that needs to be reversed. And so I think as designers, we can, put on our generalist hat, and both of the other panelists mentioned, we can collaborate with other people, but we have to know to do it first. And this happened, when sustainability was and still is a really big topic of discussion within design. The biggest outcome or the biggest takeaway I got from any of those learnings is people didn't even think about sustainability in the beginning of a manufacturing process. And now that so many manufacturing processes have been built out and so many machines have been paid for and so many people have been hired, oftentimes I think politics will be like, oh, but you're taking jobs away. And so now the designer is like, okay, us and whoever our arsenal of people are not only have to teach and educate people what the correct way to include people in your process to help to have an inclusive outcome is, we also, it's everyone's job to clean up. And it's not easy, it's not fun. Sometimes it's difficult to even understand why. But it is kind of a responsibility that I think we should all rally around and advocate for as designers.
Yeah, and that also leads me to my next question. And it's about what we're just talking about, the process. And so, you know, sometimes as designer, we find a way of working and are very good at following that process. So, you know, I go with my post-its here and there. So like design thinking. We go through the phases and achieve our outcomes. But like I found this quote from Yonette Carroll, and she says, we're not working, you know, when you talk about equity, we're not working for a process adoption, but a mindset shift. My question is then, what does design need to do to get a design equity mindset? What do we need to learn, and what do we need to unlearn? And also how, because it's more practical.
That's a big question.
Yeah. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that probably being able to let go of our ego as designers is extremely important. You know, I don't think that there's maybe a lot that we need to unlearn, but rather how to learn how to use our design superpowers to engage and understand people. And often sometimes you might find yourself thinking that you personally may not like this design that you're working on, or this wouldn't work for you, but it's not for you, you know. And it's like, and I think that that's just that's been built almost from the way that we've been taught design in education, you know, that you have this vision and you go to make things work and you sell it, and it's like, you know, you're making something really cool and impactful and whatever. And so you have a lot of ownership towards this idea. But I think that it's to make things, you know, more inclusive, that you kind of need to let go of that and realize that, like I said before, that you're kind of the facilitator in this process, and that perhaps you don't know what's best. And again, this is really unnerving for a lot of designers, because you don't really dictate. You dictate the design in the way you see it, but you don't dictate a lot of things that make it what it is. And I think that the ego can get in the way of that a lot of the time.
So to unlearn, or let the ego go a bit sometimes, maybe, yeah.
Yeah,
difficult for designers, I think.
It's difficult.
Yeah.
I think a way to practice that, and it was the first time that I'd experienced this, really, was when we started our masters, Dipali and I. And there was so many people from different, multidisciplinary backgrounds, and we'd be talking about something, and you realize, oh my God, that person has such a different experience or perspective on this thing. Just shut up and listen. And that is a big superpower, to be able to listen and accept. And oh my God, that is not my experience, but that is so valid, and that needs to be acknowledged and be part of the process of designing. So, but admitting that, and that self-realization that you know that you don't own this thing or this idea or whatever is quite difficult sometimes.
Yeah.
Go
ahead, Kevin.
Who disagrees? Let's disagree with Imran. Just to be more diverse.
I was just gonna say, I mean, I think mindset shifts are the key above process adoption, because as we've mentioned earlier, a great process isn't going to lead to a great outcome if whatever was feeding that process, wasn't inclusive. I also think that, while we do have a responsibility, and this goes back to what I was saying before, and what, Imran and Kevin were saying before about being collaborative, is that we are all part of an ecosystem. And so unless we can shake our ecosystem up enough so that the environment that we're in allows us to be and act in a certain way, then can we achieve a mindset shift. I'll use the US for example. If the purpose of a company is for profit, it's going to be really hard to combat inclusive design against what costs more and how much we need to pay our employees. And so it becomes extremely difficult to advocate for these things. And so I really think that it's in the hands of everyone, but especially in the hands of our leaders and our decision makers, because they drive the ecosystem just as much as we do, if not more. And I think that's really pivotal to a mindset shift. It would be very, very unfair to pick me up out of North Carolina, where I lived for 17 years, and say, how can you not empathize with somebody who lives in Bombay? You're Indian. And I'm like, well, I haven't been there because I don't have an ecosystem where I can see every person from every country in the world. And so, you know, we can't harp on our individual flaws and how we individually contribute to some of the lack of inclusion as much as I think we can harp on how our ecosystem is defined around us and how we can provide input to that ecosystem to make a change for a mindset shift.
Yeah, I love that example, Dipali. I think that oftentimes diversity and inclusion and equity often like harbors on demographics. And you know, as someone who like teaches UX, I think it's oftentimes one of the first two things I break is one is the idea that demographics tell all, and the second is that design and art are the same thing. The demographics part, right? Like you can describe someone as, you know, a king born in the 80s who has a castle, and you can describe Prince Charles as well as you could describe Ozzy Osbourne, the Prince of Darkness. These are not like good enough to describe the outcome we hope to achieve. And then for the other one, the art versus design, if we're talking about anyone who helps solve a problem, let's replace this term designer with problem solver. So if a problem solver is trying to solve a problem, it is agnostic of them, whereas an artist has themselves in the work, a problem solver has the problem in their work. So neither the PM or the UX designer or the copywriter can say that this is them. We are essentially, like you said earlier, Imran, we are facilitators. And so I think those two shifts in mindset will help people understand that to add as many elements that are actual factors to the outcome in the process will heavily change how we can make that like 1% kind of like improvement per day. That is the real outcome we're trying to have, not just this rigid waterfall process that we've all, you know, tried to unlearn.
Yeah, definitely. Anything to add to that, Imran? I thought you would.
Both of them articulated it so well. I don't think I could possibly add any more. That is bang on, yeah.
No, I think I was thinking about what you mentioned, Dipali, on the leadership as well, because it also sometimes feels very far away, you know, to advocate for this when you are so separated from leaderships who are the ones who set the path for a company, for instance.
Yeah.
So that's quite a challenge right there.
It is, and you know, that brings up the question: should leaders be so far away from their constituents? You know, like, should we really continue to say, oh, our leaders don't have empathy with our constituents, but we want a 100,000 person company? Of course, your leaders can be far away from your constituents, right? Yeah. So I think it just comes down to looking around you. And I don't want to live in a world where everyone's this suspicious skeptic. I think we could benefit from living in a world where everyone looks around and says, this is an outcome, and these are the documented parts of the process. Are there any parts of the process that are undocumented that my perspective might shine a light on? Can I ask other people if they feel the same way? Can I experiment with combating a process that I see outside and take it upon myself to learn personally? Like, I think these are all questions that we could ask ourselves, and I think these are questions that our leaders should ask themselves. Do they see the efficacy continue when we have so many people and so few leaders representing them? Yeah,
I think that's also very important then to have that leadership that represents. But it's a bit of a vicious circle sometimes, because you have the same people, you know, and then but okay, I think this is good to stay optimistic, and we're gonna use our superpowers to change the world. I'm gonna wrap up unless you guys and girls have anything to add to the. Yes, you do have. Okay.
One thing. Yeah, I think all of this, as you said, is a lot to take on. I think it's super, super important that as much as we say include other factors in your process and be collaborative, that we as designers are collaborative within ourselves. I think that as early in your career as possible, you should find a mentor and just be like unabashedly just cold email LinkedIn people about being your mentor, right? Or find people at the company. And these people don't need to necessarily reflect the quote unquote outcome, right? They don't need to be diverse themselves, but they need to be someone who cherishes and actually executes and exhibits the value you're trying to achieve in yourself. So sometimes having a mentor who is an executive woman can teach you more about being a woman, but also about diversity and inclusion for race and age. There's so much more we have to offer than just our demographics. So I think trying to find and fill all these gaps we have in our knowledge through, kind of, let's say, intuitive, inclusive mentorship is really important. So we have that support.
That is really, really bang on. And to kind of do that, to be in that mindset, you kind of have to admit to an extent, that you like to say, I don't know, because only by doing so, you will learn, and you will then have like the desire to go and seek people who can be your mentors. I think that's excellent. I think I've learned such a tremendous amount from different people in different experiences of mentorship, and just asking, and again, it's kind of what I meant by the ego thing. It's like, if you think you know it all, you don't. You just admit you don't know, and be educated throughout the whole, throughout in life anyway. That's just good life advice.
Yeah, exactly. I think everybody needs a mentor. We should all look for a mentor. Yeah. Okay, I mean, we just have should be wrapping it up, but I really want to thank you, all of you, for being here tonight. It was really nice just to exchange some thoughts on the topic, and I think it's very nice to start our new series this way, just to understanding what we're talking about, and so really thank you for your insights. We still have, let me share my screen, because we are going to continue talking about diversity and inclusion. And next month, we already have our next event confirmed, which doesn't happen very often, so I also wanted to show off. We're going to have Gina Taha. She's going to present her presentation, Sexy versus Sexist, on August 20th. And it's really interesting. So she looks into micro interactions and microaggressions in UI interfaces, and how product design decisions have gone wrong from a male and female perspective. So if you can tune in August, so we would love to have you there. And in the meantime, I just thank you all for joining us tonight. And the event is going to be, the presentation is going to be available on YouTube. So if you want to rewatch it, and also ourselves to see how we did. Live TV is very exciting. So thank you all for being here tonight. I don't think we have any questions from the audience. Let me check. Yes, now a lot of very positive feedback on thanking you for sharing your perspectives and insights. So great talk. Thank you. We do our best.
Thanks so much. Yeah, I appreciate it. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, let's stay in touch. So have a nice evening, and have a nice good morning for Dipali over there.
Thanks. Take care, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.